السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه وبعد. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. O Allah, increase us in knowledge. O Allah, benefit us with what you've taught us and teach us what will benefit us and increase us in knowledge, O Lord of the worlds. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we are going to be starting our reading of Daleel Al-Talib, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Now, Daleel Al-Talib is a book that was written by Sheikh Mar'i bin Yusuf Al-Karmi. I, for one, am not going to be going into his biography. I think in our introduction to the Hanbali series, we talked about the book, we talked about the intro to the book, and those types of details can be read about on your own. They're not the place for a class. Many times, fiqh classes turn into lessons in history, and they're not teaching you how to understand the law. I want to teach you to understand the law. I want you to understand the fiqh. I want you to have tafaqquh. I want you to develop the malaka, the aptitude to be able to discern right from wrong, yes from no, black from white, and all of the shades of gray that come between them. This is not simply just, here's the ruling, take it. That's the time for fatwa. And I want to say this, I want to preface our classes with that point, precisely because what happens a lot of times in classes is exactly how you see people engage online. You said this, I heard that, but you said this, but I heard something completely different. I've never heard this before. Quite honestly, as your teacher, I don't care. I'm not here to confirm your biases or to do anything else as a corrective measure other than teach you the topic. So yes, while you may be surprised that we're going to study things that don't sound palatable or it doesn't make sense to you in the beginning, that's the whole point of studying. If you already knew it, you wouldn't have to study it. And if you already knew it, you wouldn't be surprised. So the fact that you enter a class and you start to say to yourself, I've never heard that before. That's not the time to say, well, what I know is obviously correct and there must be something wrong with it. It's to say, how can I contextualize my knowledge and the knowledge of my teacher, my knowledge and the knowledge of this madhab, my knowledge in what is popular, and start to come closer to that which Allah and His Messenger want from me. As al-hukm al-shar'i huwa ma yuriduhu Allahu wa rasuluhu mink. The Sharia-based ruling, the Islamic legal ruling, is that which Allah and His Messenger want from you. In the simplest terms. So if we predicate our learning of fiqh on the idea that we're trying to find out what does Allah and His Messenger, what do Allah and His Messenger want from us in this particular instance, in dealing with this thing, in not dealing with that, in doing this or not doing that, and everything that comes in between, we will be on the path to actually learning. ليس العلم بالتمني. So knowledge doesn't happen through high hopes. It happens through application. It happens through learning and application. So that said, we are going to be, inshallah ta'ala, covering Daleel Al-Talib. And for those of you who are just watching this for the first time, You can go to my YouTube channel. The introduction to the Hanbali Madhab videos are there, where we talk about, I believe we mentioned this book in the third video about books and authors in the Madhab. And my hope is that today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to dig into Kitab al-Tahara, specifically Bab al-Miyah, specifically the chapter on water or waters, as it's ism jins, but in Arabic we use the plural, Bab al-Miyah, and we understand how the author characterizes the idea of water and how it relates to tahara or purity. So let's begin. Bismillah. Let me share my screen, and I believe the best way to do it will be like this. And see if I do that, and I make that just a little bit bigger. It'll be easier for everyone to see, inshallah ta'ala. Okay. So the author says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wa bihi thiqati. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. له لا شريك له مالك يوم الدين وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله المبين لأحكام شرائع الدين الفائز بمنتهى الإرادات من ربه فمن تمسك بشريعته فهو من الفائزين صلى الله وسلم عليه وعلى جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى كل وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So there's some typos here I'm gonna make note of as we go along. And it could be وعلى آل كل وصحبه أجمعين. وبعد فهذا مختصر في الفقه على المذهب الأحمد مذهب الإمام أحمد بالغت في إيضاحه رجاء الغفران وبينت فيه الأحكام أحسن بيان لم أذكر فيه إلا ما جزم بصحته أهل التصحيح والعرفان وعليه الفتوى فيما بين أهل الترجيح والإتقان وسميته بدليل الطالب لنيل المطالب والله أسأل أن ينفع به من اشتغل به من المسلمين وأن يرحمني والمسلمين إنه أرحم الراحمين. Okay. So the author, he says, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, and in him is my trust. Praise to Allah, Lord of the worlds. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, alone, without partner, the owner of the day of judgment. And I bear witness that Muhammad is his slave and messenger who clarified the rulings of religious laws and achieved the ultimate desires from his Lord. Now, I want you to make note of this. This is something that happens with introductions. Notice that he says, Al-Mubayyinu li ahkami shara'i ad-din. Okay? And then he says, Al-Faizi bi muntaha al-iradati min rabbihi. Which, this is translated, to achieve the ultimate desire from his Lord. Right? It's normal for authors, when they're writing their introduction, to allude to the books that they used or the book that they used in summarizing or taking the text from. So here he alludes to the book Muntaha al-Iradat, which is essentially Daleel Al-Talib, is essentially an essentialization of Muntaha al-Iradat. Ya man yarumu bi fiqhihi, something natal. I forget the verse. We've said it many times in many other classes. اقرأ لشرح المنتهى واحفظ دليل الطالب. They say, memorize, read the explanation of Muntaha al-Iradat and memorize Daleel Al-Talib. So we are going to be studying Daleel Al-Talib, inshallah ta'ala, and the author is alluding to that here. Okay, the translation is not going to always kind of be a one-to-one translation, but my hope is that the translation will help you understand the Arabic. Okay, Whoever adheres to his law is among the successful ones. May Allah's blessings and peace be upon him, upon all the prophets and messengers, and upon the family and companions of each thereafter. This is a concise work on jurisprudence according to the most praiseworthy school, the school of Imam Ahmed. I have strived to clarify in hope of forgiveness, and I have explained the rulings in the best manner. I have only mentioned that which has been confirmed as authentic by the people of verification and knowledge, and what is relied upon for legal rulings amongst the people of preference and mastery. And I have named it The Student's Guide to Achieving the Objectives. I ask Allah to benefit with it those Muslims who engage with it, and to have mercy upon me and the Muslims. Indeed, He is the most merciful on those who show mercy. The idea of mercy is one which is inherent to the learning and teaching of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ said, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman, irhamu man fil ardi, yarhamuka man fis sama. Those who have mercy will be shown mercy by Ar-Rahman. Have mercy on those in the earth. He who is above the heavens will have mercy on you. So notice here that the author, rahmatullahi alayh, is essentially hoping that Muslims will benefit from this book, inshallah, until the Day of Judgment. He says, أن ينفع به من اشتغل به من المسلمين وأن يرحمني والمسلمين. That I hope that it benefits whoever busies themselves with learning this book from the Muslims, and to have mercy upon me and the Muslims. Indeed, He is the most merciful of those who show mercy. So it's many times a norm in hadith circles that when you go to a scholar of hadith, the very first hadith that he will narrate to you will be al-musalsal bil-rahma. Will be the hadith of the continuous chain of mercy. Everyone narrating this hadith of Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. So the author now here, he says, كتاب الطهارة وهي رفع الحدث وزوال الخبث وأقسام الماء ثلاثة. أحدها طهور وهو الباقي على خلقته يرفع الحدث ويزيل الخبث، وهو 4 أنواع: ماء يحرم استعماله ولا يرفع الحدث ويزيل الخبث وهو ليس مباحا، وماء يرفع حدث الأنثى لا الرجل البالغ والخنثى، وهو ما خلت به الامرأة المكلفة لطهارة كاملة عن حدث، وماء يكره استعماله مع عدم الاحتياج إليه، وهو ماء بئر بمقبرة، وماء اشتد حره أو برده أو سخن بنجاسة أو بمغصوب أو استعمل في طهارة لم تجب أو في غسل كافر أو تغير بملح مائي أو بما يمازجه كتغيره بالعود القماري وقطع الكافور والدهن، ولا يكره ماء زمزم إلا في إزالة الخبث. رابعا، وماء لا يكره استعماله كماء البحر والآبار والعيون والأنهار والحمام والمسخن بالشمس والمتغير بطول مكث أو بالريح من نحو ميتة أو بما يشق صون الماء عنه كطحلب وورق شجر ما لم يوضعا. Okay, so this is a mouthful. So the author here starts off Kitab al-Tahara, Book of Purification. He says, the Book of Purification which is removing ritual impurity and eliminating physical impurity. So it's 2 categories. Ritual impurity, that which we can't see, but if it happens, we are in a state that obligates we make ghusl or wudu. Physical impurity, those things that have a physical body that is affecting us or is on us, and therefore we must remove it. The categories of water are 3. The first of which is purifying water, al-ma' al-tahur, which is that which remains in its natural state. It removes ritual impurity and eliminates physical impurity. And this first type is 4 types. Water that is forbidden to use, it does not notice. It removes ritual impurity and eliminates physical impurity, but it's forbidden to use. Why? It does not remove ritual impurity, but eliminates physical impurity, which is water that is not permissible. Water that removes the ritual impurity of a female, but not of an adult male or hermaphrodite, which is water that has been used by an adult woman for complete purification from ritual impurity. Number 3, water that is disliked to use when not needed, which is water from a well in a graveyard, water that is extremely hot or cold, water heated by impure means or by usurped means, water used in unnecessary purification, water used to wash a disbeliever, or water that is changed due to sea salt or due to something that doesn't mix with it, such as change caused by aloes wood, camphor pieces, or oil. The water of Zamzam is not disliked except for removing physical impurity. And then water that is not disliked to use, such as seawater, well water, spring water, river water, bathhouse water, water heated by sun, water that is changed due to a long storage, or due to the wind from the vicinity of a carcass, or due to things that are difficult to protect the water from, like algae or tree leaves, as long as they are not deliberately placed in it. Okay, what is the author talking about? What is the author talking about? The author is starting the book with a narrative. He is starting the book with a narrative. What is that narrative? The narrative is, after your shahada, the most important act of worship is salah, is prayer. And in order for your prayer to be acceptable, you must have purity. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had mentioned, that the لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم من غير طهور أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. Allah will not accept the salah of one of you without purity. Okay, so now if we want to pray, we need purity. And if we're going to purify ourselves, what are we going to purify ourselves with? We're going to purify ourselves with water. وَيُنَزِّلُ عَلَيْكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا. And he sends down for you from the skies purifying water. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم. O you who believe, when you stand for prayer, wash your faces. So washing necessitates water. So the very first thing that we need to learn about is water. Now I want to make a point here, because you're probably already reading these 4 types of pure and purifying water and saying, this is a lot of detail for something that seems very simple. And it is, but the scholars say that there are certain chapters and certain topics whose doors are made of iron, and their interiors are made of cotton candy. So for example, if you study Nahu, if you study Arabic grammar, and you need to study, the very beginning of grammar, al-ism wal-fi'l wal-harf, and all of the effects that they have, it can seem very difficult. And then once you get the hang of it, everything becomes very easy. And so it's like you're in cotton candy land. In fiqh, and specifically in the Hanbali school, studying the chapter of water is that chapter. I really feel that sometimes it's a deterrent from people who aren't serious about study. A lot of people say, "Oh, we started studying the book, we only got to the chapter of water." No, you only got to the chapter of water. If you would have stuck it out, you would have gone further. But because there's so many details it can many times be almost off-putting to continue because you keep saying to yourself, "Mali wa malaha." What does any of this have to do with me? And while the rulings might not apply to you, or they might be things which are not preponderant, they might be marjuh in fatwa these days. They apply to you in the fact that they are teaching you how to think about things even when you don't agree. They are teaching you how others thought about things, others who were much smarter than you and I, much more knowledgeable and much more well read than you and I, and how they saw things and how they noticed connections between things that we did not notice. So I'm prefacing this to say, do not approach our study of this book with the idea of, well, what am I supposed to do now? If you want to learn fiqh enough to be able to make wudu and pray and just practice, don't attend this dars. Go and find the explanation of Al-Qaddumi's primer that I have on YouTube and just study that, and that's enough for you. This class is for people who want to understand the inner logic of fiqh. They want to understand the why and the how and the structure, the scaffolding, how things are built from the ground up, from the inside out. Okay, so back to our narrative. If our narrative is that we must pray as Muslims, and that is the second pillar of Islam, and in order for us to pray, we must have purity. In order for us to have purity, we must use water. Then we need to look at water in different ways. What do you all think are the different ways that we can look at water? ما هي الاعتبارات الواردة على الماء? What are the different ways that we can look at water? We could look at water, for example, according to its ruling. حكم الماء. What is the ruling of water? The ruling of its use, the ruling of its types. So we can look at the its ruling. باعتبار حكمه باعتبار استعماله, with the perspective of its ruling, with the perspective of its use. باعتبار ماهيته, in the perspective of its form. Very good. Abu Salih says, water that is usable for worship, water that is usable for custom, water that is not usable. So it's usage, essentially. So we can go from its ruling, its use, or its form. When we drill down on ruling or use or form, then we can do induction. نستقرئ النصوص الواردة أو نستقرئ الأحوال الواردة. We will either do induction of the texts that are narrated about water, or we will do induction of the situations or forms of water. So here the author comes from the approach of trying to mention all of the different instances of water and their rulings that are mentioned in texts. The Quran, the Hadith, the Athar of the Sahaba, and the Athar of the Salaf. And this becomes very clear when you read the explanations of this chapter. Now, if you go to another book, like the books of Ibn Qudama, there will be a different approach. Or other books in the madhab, there will be different approaches. But here, the author, you might say to yourself, why are there so many details? Because what the author is essentially trying to do, he says, okay, let's inductively look at the texts of Islam. The hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Abu Hurairah, he says, some people came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They said, Ya Rasulullah, inna lanarkabu al-bahr wa nahmilu ma'ana al-qalila min al-ma'. O Messenger of Allah, we ride the ocean, we ride the seas, and we take a small amount of water with us. إن توضأنا به عطشنا وإن شربناه لم نتوضأ أفنتوضأ بماء البحر. If we drink it, we won't have water to make wudu. And if we make wudu with it, then we'll go thirsty. Can we make wudu with the water of the ocean? With seawater? قال صلى الله عليه وسلم هو الطهور ماؤه الحل ميتته. Its water is pure, meaning the sea, and its dead are permissible. Meaning you don't have to do the biha for animals that are in the sea. But the point here is not the ruling that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. The point is the categorization that the companions understood from something other than what was normally found in fresh water being added to it, which was salt. Why would they come and ask specifically about seawater? Because seawater, in its essence, fi mahiyatihi, in the form that it is found in, it is unlike fresh water. And therefore, they wanted to make sure that this type of water was not something that was not allowed for them to use. Just as the well water in Medina was asked about, bi'ri buda'a. There was a well in the Saqifat Bani Sa'ida, the garden of Bani Sa'ida, where Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was later given bay'ah to. It's now found in the courtyard of the King Abdulaziz library outside of the Masjid al-Nabawi. The well is not there anymore, but the garden is still there. And they asked that this well, there's trash that's swept up into the well. Can we make wudu with it? قال الماء طهور لا ينجسه شيء. Water is pure, it's not impurified by anything. So they wanted to ask about the water and those external factors that affect it when that water is when there's a lot of that water. Or إذا كان أصله متجدد, when it is continuously flowing and replenished from a source. So now if we look at just these two hadith, we find the hadith of Abu Hurairah, there's the idea that there is fresh water that wudu is allowed. There's the idea that there's seawater that we're not sure if we can make wudu with it. The Prophet says, yes, you can. Therefore, they understood that there was something that was water that can be purified with and water that could not be purified with, although it was not impure. Which is why the author says there are three types of water: tahurun, wa tahirun, wa najis. Purifying, pure, and impure. Now, when he starts talking about, we'll leave the hadith about bi'ri buda'a because that has to do with the amount of water. We'll talk about that in a bit. Now we have the hadith, or we have the idea of there being pure water. Pure and purifying. What is that pure and purifying water? He says, هو الباقي على خلقته يرفع الحدث ويزيل الخبث. Tahur, pure and purifying water, is that which remains as it was created. It remains in its natural state. It removes ritual impurity and eliminates physical impurity. Why does he say eliminates? Yazilu al-khabath. Eliminates physical impurity because it eliminates it from affecting the area that is clean, but it doesn't clean the najis, it doesn't change the nature of najis. Najis is najis. Impurity is impurity. It simply takes it away from affecting what needs to be purified. But when we make wudu, we actually remove the ritual impurity, so we're no longer considered in the rule of being impure ritually. But if we had some filth on our arm and we scooped that filth off and we put it on a piece of paper and we washed our arm with water, that part of our arm is now pure, but that filth on the piece of paper is still impure. This is why they say وَيَزِيلُ الْخَبَثِ, because it eliminates it from wherever it needs to be eliminated from, but it doesn't change it. It doesn't remove from it the status of being impure. That's an important point. So now he says, okay, now that we have established that there are different considerations for water, and we have established that there are three types: tahurun, tahirun, najis. So from the idea of its ruling, tahurun pures and is purifying, tahir is pure but it doesn't purify, and najis is impure, it does not purify, and it is not pure. Now he wants to answer the question of the use of water within the category of tahur. So something can be purifying and pure in and of itself, but not permissible to use. And that is number one here. ماء يحرم استعماله ولا يرفع الحدث ويزيل الخبث وهو ما ليس مباحا. Water that is forbidden to use does not remove ritual impurity, but eliminates physical impurity, which is water that is not permissible. So he says, لا يرفع الحدث ويزيل الخبث. Okay, what is the author talking about here? What I want you to picture when we talk about these four categories here, okay, is that the author is essentially telling you that within this category of pure and purifying water, there is the penultimate type of water that you should always be using, and then there is that which is disliked to use, although it's permissible, and there's that which is absolutely permitted, that which some people might have disliked, but it is permissible, that which is disliked to use, but still allowed if there's a need, and that which you should not deal with whatsoever. Now, the Hanbali madhab, has a principle in it, النهي يقتضي الفساد. A prohibition indicates the invalidity of an action. So because of this, anytime you have misappropriated something, let's say, for example, I go and I steal somebody's land. I know this land is titled to so-and-so. So I go to that land, I put up a fence around it, and I say, I know that somebody has a home. So I go and I get into the home somehow and I squat in the house. It's not my house. And it's not my property. I'm squatting in it. For those of you who are in other places, squatting means in the United States where you enter the property that does not belong to you and you take it as a residence or a domicile without permission of the owner, essentially stealing from them the benefit that they could be getting from that home by using it themselves or leasing it out to others. The Hanabila say if you pray in that house, your prayer is invalid. Why? Because you're praying on stolen land, and that stolen land or that stolen area means that your actions are invalid. So if I stole water, okay, if I stole water, something is not which is not permitted for me, ma laysa mubahan, then it's impermissible for me. My wudu doesn't count. I go to the corner store. I need to make wudu. I walk inside. I take a bottle of water. I put it in my jacket. I don't pay for it. I walk out. I go and I make wudu with that water. My wudu is not valid. Why? Because the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna dima'akum wa amwalakum alaykum haramun ka hurmati yawmikum hadha fi shahrikum hadha fi baladikum hadha." Indeed, your lives and your wealth are forbidden for you, like the sanctity of this day in this month and in this land. So there's a sanctity to that. And when you violated the sanctity, you can no longer use it for purification. What if I didn't steal the water, but I stole a bucket? I went and I stole a bucket and I brought it up to my house and I turned on the spigot, the faucet, and I put water in it and I made wudu from it. Is that permissible? My wudu is valid, but I'm sinful for stealing the bucket. Why? Because there is a difference between the water and the bucket. So why is the author even mentioning this? Because we said the author is trying to inductively list all usages that are mentioned in texts, either explicitly or implicitly, and line them out for you so that you know how to operate with using water. He then says the second one. وهو ماء يرفع حدث الأنثى لا الرجل البالغ والخنثى وهو ما خلت به المرأة المكلفة لطهارة كاملة عن حدث. Water that removes the ritual impurity of a female but not of an adult male or hermaphrodite, which is water that has been used by an adult woman for complete purification from ritual impurity. Now, in the translation, I believe there is something that is missing, and that is this here. وَهُوَ مَا خَلَتْ بِهِ امْرَأَةٌ مُكَلَّفَةٌ. That was been used in seclusion by an adult woman for complete purification from ritual impurity. You might say to yourself, I've never heard this before. This sounds strange. Where are they getting this from? Well, there are a few different texts that they're getting this from. One is the hadith of Al-Hakim ibn Amr al-Ghifari. نهى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يتوضأ الرجل بفضل طهور المرأة. The hadith is narrated in Ahmed and At-Tirmidhi. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade that a man use the leftover water of a woman that she purified herself with. And so they look at this and they look at a number of other texts, such as, for example, the statement of Abdullah ibn Sarjis. It's narrated by Abu Ubaid in Kitab al-Tahur, as well as Ad-Daraqutni and Al-Bayhaqi in their Sunan. He used to say, "Tawadda anta min ha huna wa hiya min ha huna, amma ma khalat bihi fala taqrabannahu." You make wudu from here and she makes wudu from there, meaning you both are pulling from the same bucket. But if she was alone with the water, then don't come near it. Why is this even being mentioned in the Hanbali school? Although you've probably never heard this issue before, because as we mentioned in the introduction to the Hanbali school, Imam Ahmed was keen to collect everything that had been said about an issue and then mention it in his madhab more than once. What's the other opinion on this issue? The other opinion on this issue is that this issue of seclusion has no effect whatsoever. Because of the ahadith of Salama and others, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made wudu from the water that they had used. وتوضأ النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من مزادة مشركة. Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام made wudu from the bucket of a polytheist woman. Now we won't go into why did Sheikh Mar'i mention this issue here instead of going it, because he was going according to what was considered the predominant opinion in the school at that time. The reasons for tarjih is something else. We're simply trying to understand why did they mention it here. They mention it here because it's been mentioned. And they mention it here because there's a ruling that's associated with it. And therefore, if a person applies this ruling, they'll still be making wudu properly. And they'll be avoiding something that's possibly that which is disliked. Okay? So now this is a modification. So we had this first modification is if your water is stolen, it doesn't affect your wudu. The second modification is if your water had been used before by a woman in seclusion, then it doesn't affect your wudu. Otherwise, it does. The third modification is the various situations or various external effects on the water itself. So notice number one is related to the ethics of the water. Okay. Number two is related to the physical use of the water. Number three is related to the externalities that affect the water. Number four is saying that these things which are tertiary or that are separate from the water won't affect it. Let's continue. So number one, okay. So here, number three. Within number three, this is all related to sifatul kamal lil wudu. The attribute of your wudu being complete. Not your wudu being valid. Your wudu being complete. So let's read. He says, water that is disliked to use when not needed. So what is he talking about here? He's saying, لا أحتاجه فلا أستعمله. I don't need it, so I won't use it. But if I need it, then I will use it. So if I have the ability to use water that is tepid and of moderate heat, and I have water that is scalding hot, then I should not use the scalding hot water. If I have water that comes from the city versus water that's drawn from a well in a graveyard, then I should use the city water, not the graveyard water. If I have water that is bearable and not water that is freezing cold, then I should use the water that is bearable. If I have water that was heated by something impure, like oil that is impure or dung that is impure, and people might, first world sentiments might find that offensive, but a lot of people, a lot of places around the world, they still use cow pies, which is basically cow dung, just flattened and dried out and then used as a fuel source. Or somebody stole some wood so that they can heat up the water. because I'm etching closer to that water having been affected by that impurity, or etching closer to that water being unethically sourced or heated by an unethical source, I should stay away from it if I have other sources of water. Or if that water was used in an unnecessary purification, I should stay away from that. Or if it was used to wash a disbeliever, I should stay away from that. Or if sea salt or something that doesn't mix was added to it, aloes wood, camphor pieces, or oil. Oil and the water will be separate, will they not? But if I use that water and I pour it on my skin, I may get the water all over myself, but the oil will touch me as well, which means that the kamal al-isbagh la yata'atta, the completeness of covering my skin with water may not happen. Why? Because these are things that don't mix well with water, like aloes wood and other types of fatty or oily substances. So essentially, if we look at this, we look at the graveyard water, what was heated by najis, that which is heated or changes with something that doesn't mix with it. This is looking at the effect of an externality, the relative heat or hotness or coldness of the water affects the person's use of that water. That which is heated by something which is stolen or had been used previously for an act of purity which was not necessary, is affected by the aspect of that water's use. The overarching idea here being what? That there is something that is affecting the completeness of purification, the completeness of coverage of that water, or the completeness of my reward from using that water. Therefore, the rule is, if I don't need it, I don't use it. But if I need it, I can use it because it's still pure and purifying. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build a rubric in our mind of when it is allowed to use something and when it is not, and also when it is better to use something and when it is not. Because this is not from the book, but I'll add it here. Let's just say note. Okay. Let's just say we have that which is haram. Haram, right? If I could spell haram. And we have that which is makruh. What comes next? And that which is mubah. And we have that which is mustahab. And we have that which is wajib. We have 5 rulings, correct? In reality, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When we talk about it in a gradient, we have 5 rulings. But when we talk about it in absolutes, we actually only have 2. Which is A and B. So now, what the author here is saying, you should use that which is obligatory for you to use. And it is preferred for you to use those things that have not been affected by anything else. And if you can not do that, you should just use those things which are allowed for you. And if you have a need, you can use that which is disliked for you, but it's still disliked, but you can use it. But you should not go to that which is haram. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes, to answer your question about the graveyard the bucket, yes, that's allowed. Okay. So I'm not going to keep that there in there. Okay, now the author says, وماء لا يكره استعماله كماء البحر والآبار والعيون والأنهار والحمام والمسخن بالشمس والمتغير بطول المكث أو بالريح من نحو ميتة أو بما يشق صون الماء عنه كطحلب وورق شجر ما لم يوضعا. Okay. Or okay, one thing that I need to mention here is this is like regulatory principle, okay, which in Arabic we call ضابط. Which is that which is disliked due to pious caution, known in Arabic as wara', then it is permitted when there is a need. Okay? That's a general principle that we should be taking into consideration. This kind of regulates this type. That which is disliked due to pious caution, it's better that we don't use it, but when there's a need, it's allowed. أي ما كان كراهته من أجل الورع أجيز مع الحاجة أو يتعين وجوبا. If that's the only water that you have is that graveyard water, then it actually becomes obligatory for you to use. Okay, lastly, he says, water that is not disliked to use, such as seawater, well water, spring water, river water, bathhouse water, hammam. Bathhouses are not normal for us in the United States, but they're quite normal in many other parts of the world where you have public baths. Water heated by the sun, water that is changed due to long storage or due to wind from the vicinity of a carcass, or due to things that are difficult to protect the water from, like algae or leaves, as long as they are not deliberately placed in it. What's the author mean by all of this? Actually, there's one point that we forgot to mention, and that is the water of Zamzam is not disliked except for removing physical impurity. The water of Zamzam is not disliked, meaning there are some scholars who disliked using the water of Zamzam even for wudu. This is not the case, however. But it should not be used for removing physical impurity. Why? Because of the statement of Al-Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who said, لا أحله لمغتسل. I don't permit it for a person making ghusl. فورد عن الإمام أحمد في مسائل صالح أنه سئل عن استعمال ماء الزمزم فقال إن توقاه أعجب إلي. If he refrains from using it, it's more fitting to me. Okay. Salihat says, would the water that's used for a complete purification of a woman in seclusion, would this be bottled for men and to use for purification? Yes, that's the point of the author. If so, would it be mubah for women, but still, yes, it would be permissible for women, not permissible for men, nor permissible for hermaphrodites. Why do they mention hermaphrodite? Because the hermaphrodite was indiscernible at that time. Is it a man? Is it a woman? So because it could be a man and it's a ghusl or wudu could possibly not be accepted, then it's not allowed for it to use. Okay, let's continue. Water that is not disliked. We said well water, sea water, spring water, river water, bathhouse water. Okay. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we mentioned earlier the hadith of Bi'ri Buda'a, and which is the hadith of Abu Sa'id radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, which is found in Ahmad and in Nasa'i and Abu Dawood and Tirmidhi, that قال أن نتوضأ من بئر بضاعة وهي بئر يلقى فيها الحيض ولحوم الكلاب والنتن. Should we make wudu from the well of Buda'a? And it's a well where menstrual pads and dead dogs and nitan, filthy things or rotten things are thrown. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم الماء طهور لا ينجسه شيء. Water is pure, it is not impurified by anything. Meaning that this well would be, these types of things in some of the narrations mentioned would be swept into it by the rain. And then the well was also always giving water. So the profusity of the water renewing itself at its source, as well as the amount of water, not allowed it not be affected by najasa. Therefore, if water is enough in its amount, then it is not affected by najasa. If it is a small amount, then it is affected by najasa. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith found in Bukhari and Muslim from Abu Hurairah, he said to a man, أرأيت لو كان على بابك نهر فيغتسل منه كل يوم 5 مرات هل يبقى من درنه شيء? You see that if one of you had a flowing river at his doorstep and he washed himself from it 5 times a day, would there remain any dirt on him? So the idea of the water continuously renewing itself is similar to the water being so large in it as a body as the water to repel naturally those things that are in it. So essentially, if you have an impurity fall into the water, and the body of water is so large that if you were to look at the water is so large that it repels the impurity from spreading throughout the entire body of water. You could make water on one side of the pond, and there could be a dead animal on the other side of the pond, and you would never know it because the water is so large that it's not impurified by anything. He mentions a few other things here. River water. River water is also always renewing itself. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ عَلَى نَهْرٍ جَارٍ. Even if you're at a flowing river, the Prophet ﷺ said it to the man who he said was wasting water. Bathhouse water, because it's narrated that some of the companions used to go to bathhouses and make wudu. Now, some scholars of the madhab, they said, well, what if the bathhouse water had been heated with that which is najis? Would this still be not disliked? Seemingly, from what we read in number 3, it would be disliked. And although some of those who have explained the book said that it would apparently not be, because the companions went to those houses, we find Al-Buhuti and Kashaf al-Qina', he mentions this right after وَسُخِّنَ بِطَاهِرٍ. It was heated by something pure. So the idea here, I believe, is not about the relative purity of the fuel that is heating the bathhouse water, but it is about the amount of water that is in the bathhouse, and whether or not that water is renewing and flowing. As if you've ever been to a bathhouse, then there will be a lot of water that's being used and will be constantly being renewed. It's also been narrated from Abdullah ibn Umar أنه كان يغتسل بالحميم. He used to make water with warm water or with heated water. This is what the author says: water heated by the sun. هو الماء الحار لم يشتد. So using hot water is fine; it's not disliked. Using scalding water that can burn you is disliked. أو تغير بطول مكث, or that which is changes due to staying too long, or because of the wind that it's exposed to, or the odors that it is exposed to from a carcass or the like, or it being close to a body of trash or a landfill, or it being close to things that are hard to keep the water away from. So let's say, for example, you have a pond, and on one side of the pond, you have an animal that dies on the shore. And as it dies and deteriorates, the smell of the carcass goes over the water. And you can smell it from the other side, but you see no change in the water's color, taste, or smell. It's a large body of water. It's still pure. It's not considered disliked because you have no control over that which is happening in the vicinity of the carcass, and it hasn't affected the water. You have tree leaves, a tree that's growing over your lake or over your pond, and tree leaves fall into it. Are those foreign bodies? Yes, they're foreign bodies. But are they naturally occurring? Yes, they're naturally occurring. Therefore, they're not going to affect it. You have algae growing in the water. Again, that's not going to affect it either. Some of the shurrah have also mentioned that which changes due to the fish or the wildlife, the aquatic life that are in the water is not considered disliked. So, for example, you have small minnows in the water, and minnows notoriously will defecate in the water because they're eating algae off of the bottom and then using the bathroom. They're eating something pure and it's going back into the water pure, so it's not impure. Iman says, it like a swimming pool, if there is najas mixed with it, if there is flowing water, then it would be permissible to make wudu with it, right? If the water is a large body of water. So we're going to get to the section on najas, of impure water, and when that is affected next, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so here, inshallah ta'ala, we've covered the very first section of water, okay, which is, now the author here, he says, as long as they are not deliberately placed in it. Why does he say this? What he means is, as long as they're not deliberately placed in it. If you deliberately place these things in the water, then it becomes disliked to use, because there's the possibility of it changing in nature and therefore going away from that which is its natural state. So in order to avoid that, you should not be doing that. The whole idea, again, is Water in its natural state, use that. Water in its natural state, affected by things that naturally affect it, use that. Water that is in its natural state, but it is in surroundings that can affect your ability to use it fully, your reward in using it fully, or what was the third thing that we said? Or the aspect of how it was used, then avoid that. And then there are those things which are impermissible. Right? So the idea here is that we're always striving for doing the best al-kamal for ibadah. We're trying to do the most complete form of ibadah, of course, without being OCD about these types of things. I must warn people about that, because one of the areas where people get waswas the most, where they get whispers and OCD the most, is in areas of purity. And the Prophet ﷺ warned us about going to extremes in dua and going to extremes in purity. The hadith of Allahumma salli ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the hadith of al-Mughira, I believe it was, in Sunan ibn Majah. He walked in on his son, and his son was making dua, and he said, Allahumma inni as'aluka al-qasr al-abyad an yamin al-jannati idha dakhaltuha. Oh Allah, I ask you for the white castle that's on the right side of Jannah when I will walk right in. He said, my son, when you ask Allah for good, and ask him to protect you from evil. Ask him for Jannah and ask him to protect you from the hellfire. Because I heard the Prophet ﷺ say that سَيَأْتِي قَوْمٌ يُبَالِغُونَ فِي الطُّهُورِ وَفِي الدُّعَاءِ. There will come people who will exaggerate in dua and in wudu and in tahur, in purifying themselves. أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. Okay, yeah. So when the author says بالريح من نحو ميتة, right? This does not refer to the rih of the water itself. No, it's the rih, it's the odor of the carcass that's near the water. So let's say, for example, there's a pond, and then there's a carcass on one side of the pond, and you can smell the carcass from there, but the water itself has not changed. He's saying in this case, the water is fine to use. Because we know that if the smell of the water had changed, then it would not be permissible. And we'll do that, inshallah ta'ala, when we talk about an-najis bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Okay, everyone. I want to thank you for attending, inshallah. We will be doing these on Monday nights at 9:30, inshallah ta'ala. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. For those of you who are in the school platform, then we will be creating a link that everyone will be able to consistently submit questions per lesson. And then we will answer those questions that are submitted per lesson. So the idea here is that if you can attend live, alhamdulillah. If you can't attend live, then you have to take a look at the recordings. But we will have a special session just for Q&A on the school website. You can go to school.com/Joe Bradford and check it out there. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.